My name is Lin Zhao, General of the North and a member of a royal side branch. With 300,000 iron cavalry at my command, I stood at the pinnacle of life on my very first day of transmigration. That was until I rescued a village, only for the villagers to curse me for arriving late and demand my life in return. Then, because the emperor's favorite concubine got a scratch, an imperial edict ordered me to massacre a city. Defying it meant immediate execution. Good grief, is everyone in this world this bold? I responded by sacrificing the eunuch who brought the edict to my war flag. I marched all the way to the foot of the imperial city, where the prime minister's legitimate daughter blocked my path. You, a mere side branch commoner, dare to rebel against the legitimate emperor? Putting the facts aside for a moment, are you saying you're not at fault at all? I rubbed my blade. Come, let's see if a legitimate neck is harder than my steel. I had transmigrated. To be precise, I was scrolling through short videos until 3 in the morning. After hearing an AI voiceover say, "Your Highness, the princess consort has jumped off the cliff," for the 78th time, I lost my breath and blacked out. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a bed large enough for 10 people. Above me were carved beams of golden silk cedar. Beneath me were silken quilts of shoe brocade, and the air was thick with the scent of ambergris. A maid was kneeling by the bed. Seeing me open my eyes, she cried out in joy, "The general is awake! The general is awake!" I spent about 3 seconds digesting the fact that I transmigrated, and another 3 seconds confirming that all my body parts were present and functional. Then I laughed. It wasn't a modest smile. It was the kind of laugh squeezed from the throat, 3 parts smug and 7 parts arrogant. As a man who had been bombarded by female-oriented web novel advertisements for 3 years, I had seen more female lead tropes than the fried dough sticks at the breakfast shop downstairs. I could recite the plots by heart. Prince, the princess has been sent away for a political marriage. Your Majesty, the Empress says she'll give you one more chance. Miss, the son-in-law has finally realized that the person from that night was you. Judging by the maid calling me general and the opulent surroundings, the world I had landed in was definitely a female-oriented historical setting. I looked down at my clothes, a dark gold python-patterned battle robe, a belt adorned with thumb-sized Etienne jade. At the head of the bed sat a pitch-black long blade, its scabbard encrusted with gems that could buy half of Beijing's 5th Ring Road. I was exaggerating, of course. I wouldn't actually know. I was a top-tier elite from a powerful clan. General, you had a nightmare last night. I've brewed some ginseng soup for you. The maid brought over a bowl made of precious roux porcelain. I took the bowl and asked with feigned composure, "How many troops do I have under my command again?" The maid blinked. Has the general forgotten? The 300,000 iron cavalry of the Northern Army are all under your command. I almost spat out the ginseng soup. 300,000, and they were heavy cavalry. I was just an ordinary office worker in my past life who couldn't even manage the neighborhood security guards. Yet on my first day of transmigration, I'd inherited 300,000 elite riders. The maid added, "The general is of royal blood, the cousin of Emperor Jingyuan. You are the great general of the North, a title that is hereditary and perpetual." I took a deep breath, downed the soup, and lay back on the bed. Staring at the carved ceiling, I began to seriously wonder, isn't this cheat a bit too ridiculous? But then I thought about it. Isn't this how supporting characters in female-oriented novels always are? They start with noble status and great power, appearing incredibly formidable, only to suffer intelligence-lowering debuffs and be forced to throw their lives away just to make the protagonist look better. No, I have to be careful. I'm the man who's read the script. The more satisfying the opening, the deeper the pitfall later. In the typical style of female-oriented novels, my role as general of the Northern Garrison would either be a stepping stone for some exiled prince, a backup for some transmigrated female lead, or done in by a love-struck emperor with a single imperial edict. I have to lay low, but I soon realized this world's absurdity far exceeded my imagination. On the 3rd day after transmigration, a report arrived from the border. Barbarians had invaded the south, and a small village had been ravaged. Logically, this shouldn't fall to a general of the northern garrison who oversaw 300,000 elite cavalry and was swamped with affairs. But for some reason, under this world's bizarre military rules, I had to go in person. Figuring I had nothing better to do since just arriving and wanting to experience leading thousands of troops, I went. By the time I reached the village with my personal guard, it was already in ruins. Barbarian cavalry had looted grain, burned houses, and fled. Long gone by now. We dug out over 10 survivors huddled in the cellar, trembling. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least we saved a few. I had rations and water distributed to them, and military doctors bandaged the injured. In a normal script, the survivors would now tearfully say, "General, we can never repay your great kindness." But this was a female-oriented world. A middle-aged woman covered in blood crawled out of the cellar, stared straight at me, and asked resentfully, "Are you the general of the northern garrison?" I nodded. "Why didn't you come earlier?" I froze. Our village was surrounded for 3 hours. 3 hours. If you'd come half an hour sooner, my husband wouldn't have died. My son wouldn't have died. She pointed at my nose, her voice sharp as a knife. "You're the general of the northern garrison, in charge of defense here. Why didn't you come?" "Why?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, an old man crawled out beside her, hobbled over on a cane, his cloudy eyes full of venom. "Such great arrogance, General. Come to flaunt your power after winning a battle? Over 40 people in our village died. If you'd come half an hour earlier, none of them would have perished." "Right. It's all your fault. You're the general. Why didn't you protect us?" "I'll report you. Go to the capital and petition the emperor. Make the emperor behead you. Pay with your life for the dead." I was completely dumbfounded. I turned to look at my deputy, Yin Nantian, a burly man with a face full of fleshy creases, a 10-year veteran subordinate of the original me. Yin Nantian leaned in and whispered, "General, this area was designated a war zone 3 months ago. The court sent 3 edicts ordering all villagers here to relocate to the safe zone 50 miles south. Most villages moved, but this one didn't." "Why didn't they move?" Yin Nantian's expression turned odd. "Because they thought the court's relocation compensation was too little and wanted more money. They even secretly contacted barbarian envoys, trying to play both sides." I understood. This was a classic case of, "I'm poor, so I'm right. I'm dead, so it's your fault." The imperial court had provided compensation for them to relocate, but they refused to leave, insisting on staying to negotiate terms with the barbarians. As it turned out, the barbarians had no sense of honor. They looted and killed, then fled. Now that people were dead, they blamed me for failing to protect them. I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm. I was a modern person. I believed in reason and the rule of law. "General," that middle-aged woman lunged forward again, grabbing the hem of my battle robe. "If you don't give us justice, we'll go to the capital and report you. We'll report you for dereliction of duty, for standing by while people died. We'll have the emperor punish you." Several other survivors surrounded me, each one filled with righteous indignation, as if I were the one who had slaughtered their village. Looking at their faces, I was suddenly reminded of a classic trope from those female-oriented web novels on short video apps. The female lead saves someone, only for the rescued person to turn around and stab her with words. "Why didn't you come earlier? Why didn't you save him? This is all your fault." Then the lead starts crying, feeling guilty and doubting herself, until finally the male lead steps in and says, "It's not your fault." The female lead is moved to tears, and their relationship heats up. Whenever I used to scroll past plots like that, I wanted to smash my phone. Now, I was experiencing it myself. I looked down at the woman clutching my robe, then at the surrounding survivors who looked as though they wanted to devour me whole. Suddenly, I smiled. How cunning these barbarians are. I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, yet the entire ruin fell silent. Everyone looked at me, including Yin Nantian. I scanned the area, my gaze cold. "To think you dare disguise yourselves as our citizens, infiltrate the survivors to shake military morale, and attempt to sow discord by slandering a general of the empire. The middle-aged woman was stunned. What disguise? I'm just... Shut up. Without even glancing at her, I turned to Yin Nantian. Barbarian spies have infiltrated the refugees in an attempt to disrupt the army's morale, drag them out, and execute them on the spot. Yin Nantian blinked. He looked at me, then at the group of survivors, a flash of understanding crossing his face. At once, with a wave of his hand, a dozen personal guards lunged forward like predatory beasts. What are you doing? We're commoners. General, have mercy. We aren't barbarians. We're really not. I'm Widow Wang. I've lived in this village for 20 years. Banner Chief Chun has seen me. The voices stopped abruptly. I stood amidst the ruins, expressionless, listening to the muffled thuds behind me before everything returned to silence. Yin Nantian walked back and whispered in my ear, General, it's been handled. MHM. I vaulted onto my horse and cast a glance at the scorched ruins, my heart untroubled by even a ripple of emotion. I'm a transmigrator, but I didn't come here to play the saint. If you want to follow some female lead melodrama script, sorry, you've got the wrong person. After settling the village's affairs, I thought the most ridiculous things this world had to offer were behind me. But I was wrong, dead wrong. At noon the day after returning to camp, a eunuch bearing an imperial decree arrived unexpectedly. He came with a grand spectacle. 300 imperial guards, the decree held aloft, entering the camp with gongs and drums, as if terrified someone might miss the fact that the emperor had sent them. I knelt before the command tent to receive the decree, calculating how to report the border situation to the emperor and how to request more pay and provisions, when the eunuch began to read. By the grace of heaven, the emperor decrees. While visiting Cangzhou, Consort Shin unfortunately fell from her horse and injured her arm. We are profoundly enraged. The prefect of Cangzhou failed in his duty to protect her and has been decapitated for all to see. However, the consort's fright cannot be appeased by anything less than the slaughter of the city. We command a great general of the north to immediately lead his forces south to massacre the entire city of Cangzhou, sparing neither man nor beast. Respect this. I knelt there, certain I had misheard. Eunuch, could you say that again? The eunuch repeated it in his shrill voice, without a single word changed. A massacre, because the emperor's consort took a tumble and scraped her skin while sightseeing. The emperor wanted to slaughter an entire city. An entire city, men, women, young and old, leaving not even the chickens or dogs alive. I slowly stood up, my mind racing. Cangzhou, I had seen on the maps. It was a northern city with a population of at least 100,000. Over 100,000 lives snuffed out just because a consort scraped her skin? And the emperor wanted me to abandon the border defense and lead the main strength of the Northern Army south to commit this massacre? I turned my head toward the north. For the sake of a consort scratch, the emperor was willing to gamble away the entire nation's northern defense. I had seen this kind of trope in short videos before. If you shed a single tear, I shall slaughter a city. Or if you are harmed in the slightest, I will make the whole world suffer with you. Back then, I thought these were just edgy lines from novels. And besides, the only cities being slaughtered in those jokes were tea-shop franchises. Now I realize that the emperor of this world was actually hell-bent on turning those edgy tropes into reality. I took a deep breath, looked the eunuch in the eye, and said word by word, "This is a chaotic decree. I refuse to obey." The area fell instantly silent. The smile on the eunuch's face froze, as if someone had pressed a pause button. He blinked, likely processing the term chaotic decree. In the Great Yong dynasty, for a subject to call the emperor's a chaotic decree was no different from pointing at his nose and calling him a tyrant. The eunuch gave 2 dry coughs of laughter. "General, what did you say?" "I said this is a chaotic decree. I did not accept it. I tossed the imperial decree onto the ground, turned on my heel, and headed back toward the command tent." The eunuch's expression shifted from shock to gloom. and from gloom to a cold sneer. Reaching into his sleeve, he pulled out another scroll of yellow silk, unfurled it, and began to read with unhurried deliberation. By the grace of heaven, the emperor decrees, should the great general of the north defy this edict, it shall be deemed treason. Chief Manager Wang is hereby ordered to execute him within the camp immediately. Take command of the northern army and carry out the order to massacre the city. This is the emperor's command. Having finished, the eunuch tucked the decree into his robes and looked at me with a beaming smile. General, His Majesty anticipated that you might be disobedient. Thus, I have prepared another set. Poison wine or a white silk cord. Take your pick, General. He took a tray from the attendant behind him. Upon it sat a flask of wine and a length of white silk. I stood at the entrance of the command tent, watching him. The eunuch tilted his chin up, his smile growing increasingly smug. General, when the sovereign demands a subject's death, the subject has no choice but to die. This is the way of things. Rest assured, once you are gone, I shall lead these 300,000 troops for you. As for Zhangzhou, I will handle matters there most efficiently. You may depart in peace. He paused, then added, Oh, and if the general resists, the law dictates the execution of 9 generations of your kin. Though you are but a distant branch of the imperial family, His Majesty said that a branch is still a branch, and what must be cut down shall be cut down. My personal guard stood on either side of the tent, a dozen battle-hardened veterans. They were all looking at me now, hands gripping their hilts, eyes burning with fury. Yet they did not move, for they too were waiting for my command. I looked at the eunuch and suddenly found it incredibly hilarious. A single eunuch, carrying 2 scrolls of imperial edicts and leading 300 imperial guards, dares to march into a camp of 300,000 soldiers to kill a great general who commands such a massive force? What was he thinking? No, rather, what was the emperor of this world thinking? Ah, I see. This is the worldview of a female-oriented web novel. In this world, imperial power is supreme, and an imperial decree is the will of heaven. If the emperor wants someone dead, they must die, regardless of how many soldiers or how much power they possess. At a single word from the emperor, you are expected to kneel and offer your neck. Because the sovereign commands, and the subject obeys unto death, is the divine law. Because distinction between high and low, order between superior and inferior, is the iron rule. Because in the setting of this world, imperial power is absolute, unquestionable, and requires no foundation in reality to sustain itself. Back when I used to scroll through short videos, these kinds of plot points always gave me a headache. A feudal lord with a massive army gets scared into committing suicide by a single imperial decree. Bro, are the soldiers in your hands made of paper? Now, it was my turn to face this life-or-death question. I laughed, not a cold sneer, but a laugh from the bottom of my heart, born of pure, utter absurdity. I turned around and walked back into the command tent without haste, taking my seat upon the large tiger-skin chair in the center. I sat with my legs apart, one hand resting on my knee and the other draped casually over the armrest. I did not kneel, nor did I take the wine. The eunuch's face contorted. General, what is the meaning of this? I ignored him and turned to look at Yin Nantian, who was standing nearby. Nantian, how many troops do we have? Yin Nantian cupped his fists, reporting to the general. The Northern Frontier Army is at a full strength of 300,000. Among them are 250,000 heavy cavalry and 50,000 infantry, all battle-hardened elites. Look at that. This world is just that unreasonable. There are more damn cavalry than infantry. How many troops are in the capital? Yin Nantian thought for a moment. The capital's Imperial Guard has 80,000 on paper, but corruption and ghost soldiers are rampant. Those fit for combat number less than 50,000. Moreover, those guards haven't fought a war in over a decade. They can't compare to our men. I nodded and looked at the eunuch. The eunuch's face had already turned white. Did you hear that? I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. I have 300,000 iron cavalry. The eunuch's lips trembled. General, what did you say? You said I? You. I said, I repeated it. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was like a nail driven into his ears. A mere eunuch like you dares to come blustering into my camp, ordering me to drink poison wine? You're quite brave, aren't you? The eunuch's face turned from white to green, from green to purple, and finally to a color I had never seen before, likely a mixture of terror and disbelief. You're mad. You are a subject. How dare you call yourself I? I interrupted him, my voice as calm as if I were reading a weather report. That old fool of an emperor wants to decree my death. If he is this senile, then it seems it's time for someone else to sit on that throne. A deathly silence filled the commander's tent. Yin Nanshan's eyes lit up like two lamps. The breathing of the dozen or so personal guards grew heavy. Their hands moved from their hilts and clenched into fists. The eunuch opened his mouth to say something, but only a gurgling sound came from his throat. I waved my hand. Drag him out. Sacrifice him to the flag. You wouldn't dare. The eunuch shrieked, his voice as shrill as a slaughtered chicken. I am the imperial envoy. I am the son of heaven's close confidant. You are but a lowly branch of the family, born of a concubine. How dare you? A lowly branch? I smirked. Soon, you won't have to see this lowly branch anymore. Take him away. Yin Nantian stepped forward himself, grabbed the eunuch by the collar, and dragged him out like a chick. The eunuch struggled frantically, his boots carving 2 furrows in the dirt. He kept screaming, "You can't kill me. The emperor will not let you get away with this. If the sovereign commands a subject to die, the subject must die. This is the law of heaven. I have His Majesty's handwritten decree on me. You can't. Your granddaddy here can't read." The voice cut off. A moment later, Yin Nantian returned carrying a bloodstained blade. In a deep, gravelly voice, he said, "General, no, Your Majesty, the eunuch has been sacrificed to the flag." I stood up and walked out of the tent. I looked toward the barbarian camps, faintly visible on the northern horizon, then turned toward the south in the direction of the capital. 300,000 soldiers stood silent in the night, like a sleeping behemoth. Pass the order. Assemble the entire army. Target the capital. Rebellion sounds grand when you talk about it, but the reality is a nightmare of endless details. On the first day of the uprising, I encountered my first practical hurdle: logistics. Yin Nantian summoned the generals of every division to the command tent for a meeting. An adjutant in charge of provisions stepped forward and said with great concern, "General, Your Majesty, our grain reserves are only enough to sustain the army for 3 months. Previously, supplies were allocated by the imperial court, but now that we have, rebelled, the court will surely cut us off. What will we do after 3 months?" The tent fell silent. Every eye was on me. 3 months. For an army of 300,000, between the men and the horses, the daily consumption was an astronomical figure. Once the food ran out, the army would dissolve on its own before the imperial court even had a strike. I sat upon the commander's throne, thought for a moment, and asked, "Are the granaries in the prefectures along the road to the capital well stocked?" The adjutant was stunned. I'm asking you. How are the grain reserves in the various prefectures along the route?" The adjutant stammered. "Because they must supply military needs and the capital's consumption. The prefectures near the capital all maintain substantial grain reserves." "Enough," I interrupted him, then uttered the line that future historians would record with heavy ink. "If the enemy hoards grain, I hoard spears. The enemy is my granary. First, we strike the barbarians to seize their food. Then we head south and requisition the reserves of every prefecture along the way." The tent remained silent for 3 seconds. Then Yin Nantian was the first to react, slapping his thigh with a sharp crack. "Brilliant!" His face flushed with excitement. "We hit the barbarians first. They have cattle, sheep, and horses in abundance. We'll seize, no, requisition, their supplies, feed our army with barbarian provisions, and then turn south." I nodded. "Not only that, pass the order. The army will first head north to sweep through the barbarian royal court. This will solve our supply issues and eliminate any threat from our rear. Once the north is pacified, we march south. Our cause will be righteous, and our motives justified. Under what banner shall we fight? Another general asked. I had already decided. Clear the emperor's side. The generals looked at one another in confusion. What does clearing the emperor's side mean? I was speechless, suddenly remembering that this world hadn't seen such a tactic before. The last emperor of the previous dynasty had only lost his throne because he fell for a woman who was likely a transmigrator, and he had abdicated voluntarily to go into seclusion in the mountains with her. Clearing the emperor's side means purging the corrupt officials surrounding the sovereign. The emperor favors the wicked, specifically that imperial concubine Shun, who is decadent, depraved, and persecutes the loyal. He is willing to massacre a city for the sake of one woman. Our northern pacification army rises not to rebel, but to clear the emperor's side and restore order to the court. As for what happens to the emperor after the purging, I smiled. That will depend on whether he cooperates. The generals understood immediately, kneeling in unison. We are willing to follow your majesty to clear the emperor's side. Over the next month, I accomplished 3 things. First, the northern campaign against the barbarians. 300,000 iron cavalry poured out in full force, sweeping through the barbarian royal court with overwhelming power. To be honest, the barbarians could certainly fight, but they were no match for my numbers. 300,000 against 80,000, the advantage was entirely mine. Most of my troops were elite cavalry. If I had managed to lose this battle, I might as well have killed myself by slamming my head against a block of tofu. I truly don't know why the original owner of this body, despite wielding such formidable military power, had spent his time trading blows with the barbarians and even maintaining a defensive posture. Nurturing a threat to increase one's own importance? I don't think people in this world have that kind of self-awareness. The barbarian Khan was cut down from his horse by Yin Nantian with a single strike, and all the livestock of the royal court were confiscated. The army accountant tallied the numbers. The seized supplies were enough to feed the army for 6 months. The second task, reorganizing military discipline. Although the original owner of this body was the great general of the North, his control over his subordinates had not been particularly strict. I spent 2 weeks restructuring the discipline of the army of the North. Rather freeze to death than dismantle a house. Rather starve to death than pillage. No looting and no disturbing the populace. An old soldier expressed his confusion. "General, we've already rebelled. Why are we still bothering with this?" I replied, "It is precisely because we are rebelling that we must. We are going to purge the court of evil, not to become mountain bandits. If anyone dares to lay a finger on the common people, I will have his head." After the reorganization, the army's discipline became solemn and absolute. The third task, a war of public opinion. I had a vast number of notices written and distributed throughout the northern provinces and counties. The notices stated clearly, the emperor is incompetent and senile, willing to massacre a city just because a concubine suffered a scratch. The army of the North did not rise to usurp the throne, but to purge the court and save the people. The effect was surprisingly good. It wasn't because my copywriting was so brilliant, but because the emperor's actions were truly beyond the pale. Massacring a city is something that, in any era, loses the hearts of the people. Once the news spread, officials from several prefectures directly hung up their seals, abandoned their posts, and fled. Along the route, 70 to 80% of the towns and counties surrendered on sight. It wasn't because I was so formidable, but because the contrast with the emperor was so stark. Between an emperor who wants to massacre a city and a general who wants to purge the court, the common people aren't fools. The army marched south with unstoppable momentum. 2 months later, my 300,000 iron cavalry arrived at the gates of the capital. The capital's walls were high, the moat was wide, and the gates were thick, but none of that mattered. The imperial guard defending the city numbered fewer than 50,000. and their morale was at rock bottom. On the second day, after I set up camp outside the city, 3 generals of the Imperial Guard secretly sent messengers to contact me, saying they were willing to open the gates and surrender the city. I was in no hurry to attack because the defenders' morale had not yet completely collapsed. It wasn't the right time yet. On the third day, the city gates opened, but they weren't opened by the Imperial Guard. They were opened by a woman. She rode a white horse, wearing palace attire so ostentatious it was blinding, with golden hairpins swaying in her hair and exquisite makeup on her face. Followed by a dozen or so maidservants and attendants, she swaggered out of the city gates and walked straight toward my central command tent. Yin Nantian leaned in and whispered, "Your Majesty, that is the legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister's house, Lu Ruyan. In the past, you had a history with her." "What history?" Yin Nanshan's expression was subtle. "You used to pursue her quite madly. You wrote over 300 love poems, sent countless gold and silver treasures, and even knelt before her manor gates for 3 days and 3 nights. Me, original owner, you really lived a pathetic life." Before I could digest this information, Lu Ruyan had already walked up to my horse. She looked up at me with a gaze that held no fear, no respect, and not even basic courtesy. There was only a condescending scrutiny, as if she were looking at a dog. "General of the North, it has been a long time." She spoke, her voice crisp and pleasant, but her tone carried a sense of superiority that made one's skin crawl. I sat on my horse, looking down at her, and said nothing. She waited for a moment, and seeing that I wouldn't respond, she frowned slightly, but quickly regained her arrogant expression. "I heard you intend to rebel?" she asked. "It is to purge the court of evil influences," I corrected her. "Whether you call it purging the court or rebelling." She waved her hand as if shooing a fly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is, do you know what you are doing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "You are committing treason." Her tone grew stern, like a teacher scolding a disobedient student. "The current emperor is the legitimate heir, the son of the late emperor by his primary consort. You are merely from a branch line, born of a concubine. In terms of bloodline, birth, and status, you aren't even fit to carry the emperor's shoes." She paused and glanced at the dark mass of the army behind me, the corners of her mouth curling into a disdainful smile. "Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have many soldiers? Do you think you can sit on the dragon throne just by reaching the capital? I tell you, this world has rules. There is a distinction between the legitimate and the concubine-born. There is an order to status. This is the law of heaven, the social order, something no one is allowed to violate." The generals behind me looked at each other, and a few of the more hot-tempered ones already had their hands on their sword hilts. But I raised my hand, stopping them. I wanted to hear what other ridiculous things she could come out with. Seeing that I hadn't lashed out, Lu Ruyan likely thought she had struck a nerve, and the expression on her face became even more haughty. "Lin Zhao, I know you feel slighted. You were born of a concubine and were never as noble as those of legitimate birth. You pursued me for 3 years, and I never accepted you. But none of these are reasons for you to rebel," she said earnestly. "The emperor may have made mistakes, but—" She paused there, then uttered the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. "But setting the facts aside, aren't you also in the wrong?" I was stunned, truly stunned. It wasn't because the sentence was particularly profound, but because I was far too familiar with it. I had always thought it was just an internet meme. I never expected that in this world, it was actual, living logic. Holy cow, I was absolutely floored. Seeing my silence, Lu Ruyan thought she had gained the upper hand and grew even more animated. "General, think about it. Why did His Majesty massacre Sangzhou? It was because his beloved concubine was injured, and His Majesty's heart ached for her. His Majesty's devotion to his concubine shows that he is a man of deep feeling and righteousness. A good man. Shouldn't such a good man be forgiven for making a small mistake?" She looked at me, her eyes even carrying a hint of pity. "I know. You're doing this out of jealousy. You are jealous that His Majesty is the legitimate heir jealous that he possesses a beauty like consort Shun, and jealous that he is loved by all the world. But have you ever considered that all of this is because he is legitimate and you are concubine-born? This is fate. You have to accept it. She took a deep breath and stated her final proposal. How about this? I'll go speak to His Majesty and have him apologize to you, and we'll call it even. You disband your army, withdraw from the capital of your own accord, and return to your northern border. She smiled slightly, as if bestowing a favor. As long as you are obedient, I might consider sharing a meal with you. A deathly silence fell before the commander's tent. Yan Nanshan's blade was already halfway out of its scabbard. Of the 300,000 soldiers behind me, at least 100,000 felt the urge to kill at this very moment. But I simply sat on my horse, looking down at this woman who was as proud as a peacock, and suddenly felt that this world was truly, deeply ill. In her mind, legitimacy was more important than human life, more important than the empire, and more important than the iron hooves of a 300,000-strong army. She didn't care if the emperor wanted to massacre a city. She didn't care if the emperor was incompetent and tyrannical. She didn't care that the common people were suffering in misery. She cared about only one thing. Were you born to the primary wife or a concubine? I recalled the scrolling comments from those female-oriented web novel videos. The cult of legitimacy is back. Long live the law of birthright. As long as you're born to a concubine, you deserve to be trampled underfoot. Back then, I just thought it was funny. Now, I only find it pathetic. I dismounted and walked up to Lu Ruyan. She looked up at me. I knew you would compromise smile on her face. Lin Zhao, have you come to your senses? I didn't answer her. Instead, I reached out and touched the hilt of the blade at my waist. Miss Lu, do you think the neck of a legitimate child is harder than that of one born to a concubine? Her smile froze. What? What do you mean? It's nothing. I drew the blade from my waist, the edge glinting coldly in the sunlight. I just want to conduct an experiment. You, how dare you? Lu Ruyan's face turned deathly pale instantly. She stumbled back 2 steps, her voice jumping an octave. I am the legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister's estate. My father is the current Prime Minister. Your father? I laughed. Your father opened the gates and fled the city yesterday. He's probably 300 miles away by now. It was the truth. When the Prime Minister, Lord Lu, heard that my army had arrived, he fled through the south gate overnight with a few personal guards, not even having time to bring his daughter. Lu Ruyan's face turned from white to green, then from green to purple. Impossible. You're lying. My father wouldn't leave me behind. I am his legitimate daughter. I am his most beloved legitimate daughter. Legitimate daughter. I repeated those 2 words, suddenly finding them incredibly ironic. Do you know? In the place I come from, the only difference between a legitimate daughter and a concubine's daughter is who the mother who gave birth to you was. If your mother is the primary wife, you're legitimate. If she's a concubine, you aren't. Over this one tiny difference, you lot can prattle on about status, divine principles, and social order. I raised the sword, pointing the tip at Lu Ruyan's neck. Come, let me see if a legitimate daughter's neck is harder than a blade. Lu Ruyan shrieked and collapsed to the ground. Her golden hairpins tilted askew, and her tears carved 2 tracks through the makeup on her face. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. I am the legitimate daughter. A flash of the blade. Lu Ruyan's voice came to an abrupt halt. I sheathed my sword and turned toward the city gate. Attack. There isn't much to say about the process of entering the city. The Imperial Guard opened the gates directly, and the Emperor's personal guard offered only a symbolic resistance for half an hour before dispersing. When I found the Emperor, he was hiding behind a rockery in the Imperial Garden, with only noble consort Shun by his side. Noble consort Shun was indeed very beautiful, an oval face, willow leaf eyebrows, and watery eyes that would move anyone to pity. She huddled in the Emperor's arms, shivering like a frightened little rabbit. As for the Emperor, a young man in his early 20s wearing a crumpled dragon robe, his face was pale and his lips trembled. The moment he saw me, he actually burst into tears, Cool. Cousin, you've come. I looked at him with complex emotions. In this world, he was the emperor, so everything he said was right. If he wanted to massacre a city, no one dared to say a word. If he wanted to kill a minister, no one dared to resist. If he wanted to destroy a city over a single scratch on his consort's skin, everyone would tell him, "Your Majesty is wise." Perhaps before he became the emperor, he was a normal person. But as long as he occupied the throne, he would be influenced by some unseen will, leading him to do all sorts of outrageous things. This was the world of a female-oriented web novel. In this world, love was supreme, the protagonist's plot armor was invincible, and the villain's IQs were never online. Imperial power was something that required no realistic foundation. As long as you were the emperor, you could do whatever you wanted. No matter how absurd, ridiculous, or inhumane your orders were, no one dared say no. Until one day, someone who didn't follow the script appeared and broke the established narrative of this world. And so, his predetermined fate was changed. "Cousin," the emperor wiped his tears and said piteously, "I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have given that order to massacre the city. I was just so in love with my consort that I had a moment of confusion. Could you forgive me just this once? I will make you a prince of the first rank with hereditary rights. Never to." "Enough," I interrupted him. "Abdicate." The emperor froze. "Up. Abdicate. Yes, abdicate. Write an edict of abdication stating that you lack the virtue for the throne and are voluntarily yielding it to me. That way, everyone keeps their dignity." The emperor's face turned bright red. "You? How could you? I am of the legitimate line. I am the late emperor's legitimate son. You are from a branch line, born of a concubine. You." I sighed. Legitimacy and concubinage. It's always that. They really are a hopeless lot. "Someone." I waved my hand. "The weather is getting hot. Arrange for His Majesty to go boating on Lake Tai, and let noble consort Shun accompany him." The guards came forward and dragged the emperor and noble consort Shun away. The emperor shouted all the way, "I am of legitimate birth. You cannot treat me like this. This is treason." His voice grew more distant and eventually faded away completely. The first thing to do after a successful rebellion was to establish the dynastic title and ascend the throne. The dynastic title was dying, which carried the meaning of bringing stability and order. The coronation ceremony was grand, but I felt nothing. Putting on the dragon robes, wearing the imperial crown, and sitting on the dragon throne to receive the homage of the 100 officials. None of these mattered. What mattered was what I did after ascending the throne. The first thing I did was abolish the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate birth. I did not abolish the system of primogeniture. That was the core of the patriarchal system and could not be changed overnight. Furthermore, that system did indeed have its necessity in ancient times. What I abolished was the concept of superiority based on lineage. I issued an imperial edict. From now on, when the court selects officials or confers titles and rewards, it shall only consider talent and merit, regardless of whether one is of legitimate or illegitimate birth. Children of concubines shall enjoy the same rights as those of primary wives. They may participate in the imperial examinations, serve in the government, and be ennobled as peers or appointed as ministers. This edict caused a massive uproar in the imperial court. The aged minister of rights knelt down on the spot, weeping bitterly. "Your Majesty, the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate is a ritual law of 1,000 years. It cannot be abolished. If you abolish it, the world will fall into chaos." I looked at him and asked, "Is ritual law more important, or are human lives?" The old minister choked on his words. Over 100,000 people in Sangzhou City were to be slaughtered just because a consort scratched her skin. Do you think this ritual law still needs to exist? The old minister fell silent. The edict was ultimately promulgated. Its actual effectiveness was another matter, but at least I had made a start. The second thing I did was reorganize the military system, reform taxes, build water conservancy projects, and open the granaries to provide relief. There isn't much to say about these things. They are the normal tasks a normal emperor should perform. But in this world, these normal tasks appeared abnormal because the previous emperors were all busy falling in love. Indeed, I leafed through the historical records of the previous dynasty and discovered a shocking fact. Every one of the first 3 emperors of the Defying dynasty was love-brained. The grand ancestor emperor abandoned the entire southern front for the sake of a commoner woman, leading to the devastation of over a dozen southern prefectures. Emperor Taizong killed his own 3 sons for the sake of a consort. When it came to Emperor Jingyuan, the one I had just overthrown, it was even more ridiculous. He wanted to massacre an entire city because of a consort scratch. 3 generations of love-obsessed emperors had tormented a unified dynasty until it was riddled with holes. Besides these, I also reformed various aspects such as law, education, and the economy. I abolished the cruel punishment of collective responsibility. One person is responsible for their own crimes, without involving their family members. I encouraged commercial development and reduced taxes to let the common people live good lives. I established schools and popularized education so that more children could learn to read and write. This series of reforms lasted for an entire decade. 10 years later, the Great Jing dynasty was completely transformed. The distinction between legitimate and concubine-born children was gone. The relationship between ruler and subject had been normalized. The cultural atmosphere was clear and bright, and the lives of the common people had improved. I stood upon the palace walls, looking down at the bustling markets, the heavy traffic of carriages, and the throngs of people. An indescribable sense of satisfaction filled my heart. Your Majesty, Yin Nantian stood by my side, saying with deep emotion, "In these 10 years, you have truly accomplished so much. I never dared to imagine before that the world could ever become like this." I smiled. "This is just the beginning. We still have a long way to go. Your Majesty, what else do you wish to do?" I looked toward the distant horizon and smiled slightly. "I want every person in this world to be able to live like a human being." 20 years later, the Great Jing dynasty had entered an unprecedented golden age. The economy flourished, culture thrived, and the people lived and worked in peace and contentment. As a transmigrated emperor, I finally led the life I had always dreamed of. Every morning, I would wake up and practice with my saber for half an hour before having breakfast. After breakfast, I went to the imperial study to review memorials. In the afternoon, I went to the council chamber to discuss state affairs with my ministers, and in the evening, I would drink tea and read books in the rear garden. On weekends, I would change into plain clothes and take a few guards for a stroll through the streets. I'd eat a bowl of wontons, buy a skewer of candied haws, and listen to the idle chatter of the common folk. Life was comfortable and serene. One afternoon, I sat in the imperial study, flipping through a newly published novel. The title was The Romance of the Northern Border, and it told the story of a general who rebelled to become emperor. As I skimmed through it, I found the story very similar to my own experiences, yet the ending was different. In the novel, after the general became emperor, he became fatuous and tyrannical, indulging in wine and women all day until he was eventually overthrown by someone even more powerful. Seeing this ending, I laughed. "Your Majesty, why do you laugh?" Yin Nantian, the Duke of Yin, asked curiously from the side. "It's nothing." I closed the book. "I just think this ending is poorly written." "In what way is it poor?" "This general went through so much trouble to become emperor. So why would he then become fatuous and tyrannical? Isn't that just a waste of effort?" Yin Nantian thought for a moment. Perhaps the author wanted to suggest that power corrupts people. "Corrupts my ass." I tossed the book aside. Whether a person can stay true to their original intentions has nothing to do with power. It has to do with the person. I've been emperor for 20 years now. Have I been corrupted? Yin Nantian looked at me and shook his head earnestly. "Your Majesty has not been corrupted. Then isn't that all that matters?" I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the fiery clouds of the sunset in the distance. "Nantian, Do you know why I've been able to stay true to my original intentions? Please enlighten me, Your Majesty, because I know that I didn't become emperor for the sake of enjoyment, but to get things done. I turned around and looked at him. There are many irrational things in this world, and I want to fix them. Once they're set right, I will be satisfied. As for power, wealth, and beauties, you can't bring those things with you when you're born, and you can't take them with you when you die. Why would I want so much of that? Yin Nantian remained silent for a moment, then bowed deeply. Your Majesty is wise. Stop with the flattery. I chuckled. You are the esteemed Duke of Yin now. Why are you still following me around all day? Go tend to your own business. Yes. Yin Nantian turned and left. Night fell. Standing by the window, I suddenly remembered the night before I transmigrated. That night, I was lying on the bed in my rented room, scrolling through short promotional videos for female-oriented web novels all night long. I had typed a comment. Is this male lead a psycho? Is this female lead an idiot? Does the author have water in their brain? And then I transmigrated. Thinking back now, perhaps the heavens felt my criticism was justified, so they gave me a chance to change this world. I did it. I changed this world. I made it more normal, more rational, and more beautiful. As for those ridiculous plots from the novels, let them stay in the books. After all, the real world no longer needs them. I smiled faintly, turned back to my desk, picked up a brush, and wrote 8 characters on a blank sheet of Xian paper. Asterisk, the land endures forever. Peace prevails throughout the world. Asterisk. Then I set down the brush and blew out the lamp. It was late. Time to sleep. There is still much to be done tomorrow.